My brother referred a show on Netflix, not because he loved it, but because he hated it. And like an idiot, I started to watch this show, and now I'm waiting for the next season to start so I can continue hating it as much as my brother. Why am I watching something that I hate? I'll explain that in just a second as we tackle the question of the month, which is, what was the last thing you referred someone to and why? Hit it, ladies.
The School of Podcasting with Dave Jackson.
Podcasting since 2005. I am your award-winning Hall of Fame podcast coach, Dave Jackson, thanking you so much for tuning in. If you're new to the show, this is where I help you plan, launch, grow, and monetize your podcast. My website is schoolofpodcasting.com. Use the coupon code LISTENER, that's LISTENER, when you sign up for either a monthly or yearly subscription. And do you know how you keep your audience engaged? I'll tell you in just a minute. It's kind of a joke. We'll get to that in just a second. I do want to get some housekeeping things very quickly out of the way, because it is Question of the Month episode. If you're new to the show, the last episode of the month is where you get to come on, Mike, and answer a question for me. But I want to let you know, if you ordered one of the autographed copies of my book, Profit from Your Podcast, I did get your order. I was in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania all week at the Libsyn headquarters, and to make a long story short, was in meetings the whole time and never really found a post office. So those will be going out today. As you listen to this, I'm somewhere mailing those out. So my apologies for the slight delay on that. And today's question of the month is, what was the last thing you referred someone to and why? And before we get to that, I want to answer the question that you're probably thinking, Dave, what is the name of the show that your brother referred to you and you are watching it so that you can both hate it together? And it's called Virgin River on Netflix. And it's kind of like what would happen if you took a poorly written mob movie and mixed it with a Hallmark Christmas movie. It's got it all. It's got bad acting. It's got really beautiful scenery. It's got the occasional drug deal and murder. And here is the premise. Virgin Rivers follows Melinda, better known as Mel, who answers an ad to work as a midwife and nurse practitioner in the remote Northern California town of Virgin River, thinking it will be the perfect place to start fresh and leave her painful memories behind. But she soon discovers that smart town living isn't quite as simple as she expected. She must learn to heal herself before she can truly make Virgin River her home. So why am I watching this particular show? And it is actually a scientific thing. Now, some people may argue this, and it's called the Zeigarnik Effect, based after this Russian scientist in the 1900s. So this has been around a while. So what is the Zeigarnik Effect? And I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of that. But it's basically when you start working on something, but you don't finish it, thoughts of the unfinished work continue to pop into your mind even when you moved on to other things. So such thoughts urge you to go back and finish the thing you have already begun. It's why you keep thinking about that page turner. So why was Lost, the TV show Lost, so popular? There is a show, speaking of Netflix, on Netflix right now that was canceled on mainstream television, and it's called Manifest. And it's about this plane that goes up in the air, and when they come back down to land, it turns out that their plane, they thought they were dead for 5 years. And what's really going to be very sad about this particular television show that has now been picked up on Netflix is that this is not going to end well. No matter how they do this, everybody's going to go, I want to know what happens next. I want to know what happens next. And that's really the key to this, is you do want people to wonder what's going to happen next. Well, when they finally reveal why did this plane somehow disappear for 5 years, a lot of people are going to be upset. So what we're talking about, people always say, what makes a good podcast? And we're going to talk about this today in terms of why are people referring, a show or whatever it is to other people. And what I did, this is my own little study, and you can do this yourself, is I kind of made a note on my phone every time I watched something, every time I read something, every time I listened to something, some sort of media. I wrote down why am I doing this? And for me, I found that if it made me laugh, cry, think, groan, educate, or entertain, that's why I was doing it. And I often say that thank you for joining me on my mission to rid the world of boring podcasts. And what I mean by that is I'm trying to help you ensure that your show makes people laugh, cry, think, groan, educate, or entertain. Because if you're not doing at least one of those, preferably more than one, you're boring. And what we're talking about is not just getting somebody to listen, getting somebody to stick around. And right now, in September of 2021, Apple has redesigned Apple Podcasts to where the follow button, it's no longer a subscribe button, but you can follow people, is a pretty small plus sign in Apple Podcasts. I heard somebody say that you can't subscribe anymore. That is entirely inaccurate. It's now called follow, and it's now a plus sign. But what was replaced by the giant subscribe button is now a listen button. So you want to grab people's attention. And if you can, structure your content so that you kind of drip out the content so that they're always asking, I want to know what happens next. It's that Zeigarnik Effect. You've given them a chunk of it, but there's a piece missing, and they're not going to sleep well until they know that missing piece. And that missing piece is something they kind of want to know about. So here's an example. This isn't a horrible example, but if you said, could you feed a kid a healthy school lunch for $2.68? We'll show you how that number is making our kids fat. Okay, well, we kind of already know the story. We're spending $2.68 on school lunches, and it's making people fat. But if you leave out a piece of that, if you say, experts say school lunches are making our kids fat, guess how much money your school gets to try to give kids healthy school lunches? And people might go, wait, how much? Because we know the story is our kids are getting fat. I don't think we need the news to tell us that. But now it's this piece like, well, how much is it? So that is the fun-filled Zeigarnik effect, and an example of dripping content so that people are wondering, hey, I wonder what happens next, is I grew up with two movie critics in the U.S. They were called Siskel and Ebert, and they were very different. That's the first thing we should learn there. So when you're looking for a co-host, it's kind of cool if you both don't have the same opinion, because otherwise, again, we go back to it's kind of boring. Hey, I liked the movie. How about you? I thought it was great. How about the next one? I hated it. Me too. So they had two different people, and they would explain it. But the thing that they were leading up to was, is this person going to give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down? And so as they're talking about it, and he'd say, well, the cinematography was this way and the music and the acting. And you're like, okay, but is this a thumbs up or a thumbs down? So by having people asking themselves, I wonder what happens next, that I believe is a key ingredient of a podcast that makes you laugh, cry, think, groan, educate, or entertain. You have to keep them engaged. You have to keep them wondering, I wonder what happens next. Another thing that can boost people listening to your show is when there are stakes. And that's something you hear about in storytelling and in books. And speaking of books, this would be a good time for me to tell you about novel marketing. This is a great podcast. A lot of podcasters, I surveyed my newsletter as well as members of the School of Podcasting, and almost 90% said, yeah, I'm actually thinking of writing a book. And our sponsor today is a novel marketing podcast, and they are here to help. And I've been talking about their 10 commandments of great book marketing, and they have a thing. It's a course called the 5-Year Plan. It's devoted to helping you develop Olympic levels of writing and marketing. It says when it takes most novelists 10 years to be good, this plan enables you to do it in half the time. And it actually ties in with a little bit about what we're talking about right now, and that is mastering the craft. That is commandment number 3, master your craft. In their case, writing, which is kind of similar to podcasting. We're both creating content. And so for more book promotion and publishing help, listen to the Novel Marketing Podcast in your favorite podcast app or at novelmarketing.com. I'll have a link out at schoolofpodcasting.com/794, or you can just go to schoolofpodcasting.com/author. So, what are stakes if you're not writing nonfiction or something of that nature? The stakes of this show are, is Dave going to be able to give you some tips to help you avoid being boring? That's what we're waiting to see. Oh my gosh, is he going to be able to do it this week? It might be, if you're telling a story, hey, if this person is on a ledge and if they take one step, they're going to die. And these are things you're like, ooh, I want to see what happens next. Those are stakes. And there's all sorts of ways that you can add stakes to your podcast to make people ask, I wonder what's going to happen next. And that leads us to our favorite segment, which is, of course, hey, that's illegal. Yes, I don't have permission to play this, but I'm going to play you a clip from the movie Howard Stern's Private Parts. Howard Stern is a very famous radio personality here in the U.S., and here he is in this scene. They are talking about his ratings and hear why this man was so popular when he was on terrestrial radio. He's now on satellite radio.
The average radio listener listens for 18 minutes. Mm-hmm. The average Howard Stern fan listens for, are you ready for this? An hour and 20 minutes.
How can that be?
Answer most commonly given, I want to see what he'll say next.
All right, okay, fine. But what about the people who hate Stern?
Good point. The average Stern hater listens for 2.5 hours a day.
But if they hate him, why do they listen?
Most common answer, I want to see what he'll say next.
So again, that is not something that was legal to play. I'm playing it anyway because if I have to, I would use the fair use, which is the defense I use if I go to court. And the last time I checked, court is not free. So do as I say, not as I do. And that brings us to the question of the month, where I asked you, what was the last thing you referred to? And the new question of the month, we'll get to after your answers, is something that I am bringing up because I'm not sure it makes people go, oh, I want to know more about that. But we'll get to that in just a minute. Here, let's get to the question of the month. Here we go. What was the last thing you recommended and why? And the reason we're looking for why is because we want to see what makes people share stuff.
This is Scott Johnson, and the thing that I have recommended recently is a podcast called Dumb People with Terrible Ideas. Now, I have to tell you, usually when I see a podcast with a name like that, I immediately dismiss it. I mean, there are multiple podcasts that are named Two Dumb Guys, and there are some called Dumb White Guys, Dumb People Town, the Two Idiots podcast, Two Drunk Guys, and there's lots of variations on all of those. And why anyone would want to listen to a couple of really dumb people have a conversation is beyond me. But to each his own, I guess. But a while back, I was listening to the podcast Rodeo show, where some guy named Dave Jackson listens to a podcast and gives his honest first impression. And this show came up, and I kind of liked it. Even though the show is called Dumb People with Terrible Ideas, it turns out those dumb people are not the host. Those are the people the host is talking about. He's done episodes on Rudy Giuliani, Marjorie Taylor Greene, the Capitol Insurrectionists, and someone you may never have heard of, a guy named Frank Selak, the world's unluckiest man.
Welcome to the Zeigarnik Effect. How bad you want to know why that guy is called the world's unluckiest man? Back to Scott.
The host is Eric Gray, who I never heard of before, but he has a way of talking that combines snark and sarcasm and a large vocabulary, not to mention a great voice for podcasting. So I checked it out, and then I subscribed, And then when someone on Facebook asked what podcasts I've listened to recently, I talked about it. And here I am talking about it again. And my show is called What Was That Like?, where I talk to real people who have been through some type of extremely unusual experience. You can find it on whatever player you use to listen to podcasts or at whatwasthatlike.com.
Thank you, Scott. And that's an example of information you can't get anyplace else. I've never heard about the world's unluckiest man anyplace else. There's snark, so there's some humor in there as well. So it's educational and it's entertaining. And notice there was a thing in there. Scott was surprised because he's used to hearing these dumb shows, no pun intended. And then this one came about, and that is actually a really good show, as is Scott's. Scott has this one episode where this guy got attacked by a bear, and basically the bear crushed his skull, and he lived to tell about it.
Hi, Dave and all. This is Jennifer Longworth of Bourbon Barrel Podcasting, empowering Kentuckians to change the world one podcast at a time. You can find me online at bourbonbarrelpodcasting.com. One thing I've recommended lately is Color Street for your nails. You may or may not have heard of this, but I love it. And that is why I recommend it. Typically, the conversation goes like, hey, Jennifer, I love your nails. Today, I'm wearing blue sparkles. And I'll say, great, thanks. It's Color Street. Have you heard of it? And then I'll explain the features and benefits of Color Street. And hopefully by the end, if I were selling it, I would close the sale. However, I don't sell it. I just recommend it. But why? Because someone is already interested and we've started a conversation, and because I love it and passionate about it and believe in it. So that is why I recommend Color Street. Again, this is Jennifer Longworth with Bourbon Barrel Podcasting, and I can recommend some tasty bourbon for you sometime as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Jen. I knew we had a lot of stuff in common. I did not know we wear the same nail polish. That's amazing. But think about this. I bet it has to come into play that one of the reasons why Jen likes to wear that, wouldn't you wear something if somebody said, wow, you look really great in that? That's pretty cool. So thanks for sharing that, Jen.
Hey, Dave, it's Matt Rafferty. The most recent thing I shared was an episode of the social media marketing podcast from Michael Stelzner. His latest episode, How to Create a TikTok Video That Connects, I shared with Tim Scott from Resort Loop and Chris Tatum from Cross-Examined Life. So the episode is great for podcast marketing because this lady explains how to effectively use TikTok videos to help promote your podcast. And I thought that there's a lot of people who aren't my age on TikTok, and I thought that would be a great thing to share with these guys. So thanks for listening. And if you get a chance, check out my podcast. It's called The Author Inside You. We interview authors about writing, publishing, and promoting their books. And the idea is to motivate you to write the book that you've always wanted to write. So thanks again, Dave. Talk to you soon. Bye.
So in Matt's case, he was sharing something because it was helpful. So when you create content that is helpful for people, your audience might be more likely to share it.
Hi, Dave. This is Timothy Chemo Bryan from Create Art Podcast, and you can find it at createartpodcast.com. I'm also co-host of Podwrecked, and you can find that at podwrecked.com. At Create Art Podcast, we help you create more than you consume, and at Podwrecked, we help you survive your podcast. So to answer your question of the month, what did I recommend to somebody, or what did I recommend to somebody and why? We have a special project going on where I work at, and one of my coworkers, she runs our health and wellness department, and she was looking for podcasts to listen to and kind of get an idea because she's wanting to start a podcast for work, which I have already done. And so I went ahead and did some research for her and found some podcasts that are pretty top rated, listened to them before I, referred her to those. And she is listening to them now as we speak, and we'll be passing it along to our employees, as well as, producing. Well, I'll probably be producing her podcast, but she'll be doing her own podcast. Thanks, Dave, for all that you do. And I like this new system that you have going on here. Seems pretty easy to use, using it on my phone. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim. Tim didn't really explain much on why he shared those, but we do know that where he works, they're making a podcast. So this is where, if we could put up air quotes, this particular woman is getting inspiration by listening to other shows. And that's really what it is. You're like, what are other people doing? Because I'm trying to figure out what to do with my podcast. And that's where you go, I will be inspired by this show, and I will be inspired. You can't hear my air quotes, can you? With this, and you put them all together and you come up with your own thing inspired by other people.
Hi, Dave. It's Haley Radke from the Adoptees On podcast. My website is adopteeson.com. And in my podcast, I am adopted, and I talk to other adopted folks about their experiences being adopted. The last thing I recommended was super out of the ordinary. I'm back podcasting from my summer break, and I did an Ask Me Anything to kind of kick off the year. And someone asked, what were your favorite books of the summer? And so I did share that I had read Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. And I gave this caveat, like, I know everybody's probably already read it. It was on the New York Times list, but I love that book so much, Dave, that I haven't felt like this way about a book for a really long time. And I had this really beautiful experience reading it, so much so that I told my husband, I was like, if I could erase that from my mind and start over and have the same fresh experience reading it again and discovering all the, twists and turns and surprises of the book, I would read it again in a heartbeat. But because, I'm not going to reread it probably for a while until I forget some things, because I love that experience so much. And it felt so weird to recommend a book like that on my podcast, because usually we're only talking adoption stuff, only talking about it, but it truly was just a hit, a favorite. So yeah, that's why I recommended it. I love your show. I appreciate your work so, so much. Thank you so much, Dave, for what you do for the podcasting community.
Thank you, Haley. It's always great to hear from you. And the biggest thing I loved about that clip was the genuine sincerity and just the dripping of passion of, oh my gosh, you could hear how that book affected her just by the way she talked about it. And to me, that's what you want your audience to sound like after they listen to your show. It's like, this episode was like, holy cow, I can't believe that this person made this episode for me. I've never felt this way about a podcast. That's what we're shooting for. It's not an easy target to hit, but I love that clip. Thank you so much, Haley. And again, just a quick reminder, everybody that contributed, I will have a link to their website at schoolofpodcasting.com/794.
Hey, this is Jerry Dugan from Beyond the Rut podcast. And the last thing that I recommended to somebody, it's pretty much the same thing I've been recommending, and that is for a good entry dynamic microphone that is both USB and XLR. You got to go with either the ATR 2100 or the Samson Q2u. So if you're brand new getting into podcasting, you don't have to shell out $300 or $400 on a microphone and then another $500 or $600 on a mixer and interface. If it's just going to be you interviewing people remotely, ATR 2100, Samson Q2u will do just fine. The other thing that I have also recommended to folks is the Podtrak P4 by Zoom, because if you're going to be doing a variety of types of interviews, in person, online, plugging in phones, etc., the Podtrak is a great entry-level mixer/interface/recorder. And again, you can keep that budget nice and low. And then as you grow your podcast, grow your equipment with it. So those are the biggest things I've been recommending for at least the last year. And it's a commonly asked question among brand new podcasters. So there you have it. Again, this is Jerry Dugan from Beyond the Rut podcast.
Jerry, thank you so much. Great minds apparently think alike, because that is exactly what I recommend to people. If you go out to schoolofpodcasting.com/mygear, you'll actually see a tutorial that I don't even need your email address. You can watch it there, and I go over the different pieces, parts of podcasting equipment, and those are the two things that I recommend the most.
Hi, this is Mark Vinette from the History of North America podcast, where I explore the wonderful and tragic stories of North America's inhabitants, heroes, villains, leaders, environment, and geography at markvinette.com. The last thing I recommended was the new podcast, Leading the Bleeding, with Dave Jackson. My teenage son, Sean, who is my partner, audio technician, and sound editor, is fascinated by cryptocurrency and is enjoying the show's in-depth analysis of the intersection of podcasting and Bitcoin.
Thank you, Mark. Who is this Dave Jackson guy that everybody's talking about? But that show, Leading the Bleeding at leadingthebleeding.com, is an example of a show where I kind of looked for a show that would explain the whole crypto podcasting thing like you were a third grader, and I couldn't find it. And since I have the mentality of a third grader, I went ahead and made one my own, and there will be a new episode soon, and I'll be adding some new features to that podcast. That is one I'm just playing with, but I am having fun.
Hey, Dave. Testing out the new system here with Telby. Anyway, you wanted to know something we recommended lately. Just this morning, when I recorded this week's episode of your Packers Fan podcast, the show by and for fans of your 13-time NFL champion Green Bay Packers, I recommended any listeners that wanted a challenge that were technology-minded to check out Podcasting 2.0 and some of the cool Podcasting 2.0 compliant apps, such as Fountain, which is the one I've been using a lot lately, and given a little bit of background information. Just trying to share the love, share the knowledge, and to try to let people know that there is a newer, better way, although it may not be as easy as some of the basic apps. It's worth it. Wayne Henderson here from your Packers Fan podcast.
And of course, you might recognize that voice from this clip.
Ooh, now that's a good question.
Find Wayne over at mediavoiceovers.com.
Hey, Dave, this is Fred Castaneda speaking. Podcast that I have, the most recent one is called Grumpy Old Bears at grumpyoldbears.com. That's in addition to my flagship podcast, podcastreporter.com. Anyway, what was the one thing that I referenced or referred somebody to? And that was to the noagendastream.com. That's right, noagendastream.com. And the reason is that they've got good podcasts. They're always available 24 hours. And yes, my podcast of 2030podcast.com is also featured there and also produced. Brian Bemrose does that for us. And I would recommend that stream to people because it's narrow. It has a targeted audience. And if you are part of that audience, you're going to enjoy what they say, and you're probably going to be following them. So noagendastream.com is the website that I would recommend for listening to podcasts at any time, especially Adam Curry and John C. Dvorak in No Agenda at noagendashow.com. It's there, and they produce it. They publish it lots of times during the week. And as I said, I find a wide variety of topics, discussions, and talents, including my own. Thank you very much, Dave. NoAgendaStream.com is what I would refer.
Thank you, Sergeant Fred. Always great to hear from you, which leads to me. And before I play the couple things I've recommended, I've been kind of paying attention to this. And so before I talk about the first one, I need to play this just in case to keep you safe. You guessed it. Invisible Sky Buddy alert. Invisible Sky Buddy alert. Beware. Scott mentioned how there are so many podcasts with dumb hosts, the proverbial two guys, one brain show. And in my travels of watching somewhat Christian movies, they're really bad. And it's weird because if you say, number one, it's the phenomenal skills of Kevin Sorbo, for those of you who remember Hercules, or some guy that must be the executive producer because he's in all the movies. You're like, it's him again. And I love the fact that there was one movie called God Is Not Dead. And then there was a sequel to that, God Is Not Dead 2. And I'm like, were there unanswered questions from the first one? Did somebody not get the point of the first movie? So they're usually like not what I would call stellar, not something that I'm out telling people, you got to go see God Is Not Dead 2. And because they're like, I don't want to say that they're not good, but I will. And when you say that, you always feel like there's going to be a lightning bolt. Like, man, that movie about God was awful. And then that's it. And then we got to go back to the episode I did about what happens if you haven't set up some sort of plan for your podcast being dead. But I want to talk about the Chosen.tv. And here's what's cool about it. It doesn't suck. And Jesus actually has a sense of humor. And the disciples kind of basically bust each other and kind of make fun of each other. And ladies, the disciples are kind of hot. And at one point, Jesus actually said, not too shabby. And I was like, wow, wait a minute. It's well acted. It's well shot. It's produced by this like YouTuber, like total dude. It's just, and then I love the funding of it and the marketing of it. So here again, it's something that stands out. And if you're into that kind of content, just in the same way that Fred was talking about the No Agenda show, that is a specific audience that's shooting for. And this is one that you can watch. And it's just the whole time. And this is it. You can't wait. Now, look, I know the story. I've read the book and I'm still waiting to see the next episode because I want to see their interpretation of it. Not so that I can go into a recreational outrage, even though that is the national pastime, but just to go, huh? And so that's one thing I'm really looking forward to. The other one is my brother said, hey, we're kind of out of stuff on Netflix. What would you recommend? And I said, have you watched Breaking Bad? And he's like, no, everybody keeps telling me to watch that one. So point number one, word of mouth. And I said, dude, Breaking Bad or Dexter. I said, but I would recommend Breaking Bad. Now, here's why. Breaking Bad, here's the story. It's a high school chemistry teacher that finds out he has cancer and figures out that, hey, his brother-in-law is a cop. I believe it's his brother-in-law, not that it really matters. And these drug people are getting all sorts of money, and he wants to leave money to his wife and kids because he's pretty sure he's going to die. And so the fun part of this, it's not really a comedy. The fun part of it is that you watch him go from mild-mannered chemistry teacher to basically drug kingpin. And every week you kind of go, huh, I wonder what's going to happen next. And it's always like these great cliffhangers and, oh my gosh, are they going to get caught? Is somebody going to die? Things of that nature. And that's one of the keys to great content is what's going to happen next. We talked about that in a couple episodes ago, but I want to bring that up now. But that's two things that I recommended that were just great. They're both great stories. And they're well acted, and they both have you, for me at least, wondering, I wonder what's going to happen next, even though I read the book on the one and I know what's going to happen next, but I'm just looking forward to it. And as for October's question of the month, I'm going to do something a little different. And that is, I'm opening up basically a dialogue. And here is the question of the month. If you have insights as to why, I would love to hear it. And you're like, about what? So many people start off an interview and they help the guest tell their story. And I'm trying to understand why. And off the top of my head, let's say there was that guy a couple years ago here in the US that landed a plane on a river and everyone survived. So instead of crashing the plane, he actually landed it. They made a movie about it called Sully. And so that would be like me having Sully come on to talk about this miraculous landing and going, so tell me a little bit about yourself. Or even if I said, where did you go to school? Where did you live? I'm not really sure that the audience is tuning in to find out that Sully was descendants of a Swiss-German immigrant parent kind of thing. So you kind of know my take on that. And this is where I'm like, maybe I'm missing something. And I do know a little bit about this, so I'm going to keep my cards back on that. But I would love to hear if this is something you do And again, I just don't understand it. So I'm trying to understand before being understood. Or if you listen to podcasts that do this, do you like it? And why do you like it? Because I hear a lot of people giving backstory of their guests. And for me, there are times when I go, I'm not sure I need that much backstory. I just want to hear about the time when you landed a plane in the Hudson River. So I need to know, why are you doing that? What's the purpose? And what effect does it have on you if you are a listener? Now, I need these. I need your input on this by October 22nd, 2021. You can go out to schoolofpodcasting.com/question and leave your answer there. And I am using voice form, and I love the system for making surveys. I love the fact that I can put my voice into the survey and you can leave it, and you heard where people were answering these on their phone. Some of these, like Wayne was using my old system, which was Telby, and I kind of switched because I found this new system, and I did find something, and I will let you know in the next episode. There is a bug in this particular service, and that is that I said, wow, one of the reasons I bought it is I can have, like in this case, we had about 9 different answers, and I could download all those audio files by zipping them up and downloading them together. And that worked great. It zipped them up, let me download them in one file, and I unzipped them, and all the files were 4 seconds long. It'd be like, hey, Dave, this is Scott Johnson from the, what was that? And I was like, oh, that's not good. So I go to the next one. It's like, hey, Dave, this is Hallie Radke. And I was like, what I had to do just to give you, now, normally, if this was your podcast, I usually say the audience doesn't care how the sausage is made, but in this case, you actually care how the sausage is made. How did I get around this? Because when I downloaded the files individually, again, I would get 4 seconds, and I could see where some of these were like a minute and a half long. And I'm like, well, that's really weird. So what I did, and this is one of the reasons why I love Hindenburg, I use Hindenburg Journalist Pro. And yes, it's not cheap, but one of the features I love about it is I can go in and say, hey, for this track, the source is not my Rodecaster, but other applications. And by other applications, it basically means whatever's coming through your computer speakers. So I went into the voice form tool. I would hit play on the voice message, play it, and record it in Hindenburg, which kind of defeats the whole purpose. So I have sent a note into their help desk saying, hey, guys, what's the deal with this? I know it's kind of a new system, but it's not supposed to do this. And for the record, I tried other kind of test questions, and I didn't have this problem before. So it might just be a glitch. But if you want to check it out, schoolofpodcasting.com/voiceform, that is my affiliate link. And I'll let you know how things go with support. My guess is hopefully they'll get this little glitch fixed or whatever it is. But that is the question of the month. Thanks again to everyone who chimed in. You can find links to everything at schoolofpodcasting.com/794. So today we learned about the Zeigarnik Effect and how dripping out content. And for the record, that doesn't mean wasting people's time. Oh, let's just vamp here for a bit. No. Don't waste their time. But dripping out the content can leave people wanting more. And that is a strategy kind of in our arsenal of options to stop our podcast from being boring. We heard why people share content. It's especially if it fits someone like a glove, they're going to talk about it. It can be useful for people, and it might actually help them save time and headaches. So we had people like Jerry talking about microphones. That'll help you avoid that. We talked about Jen and Haley, both had tons of passion about different products and things like that. So I wanted to kind of review that real quick. And then the other thing I want to bring up here, when we talk about mastering a craft, please don't let that scare you. I made a fair amount of money over the years playing the guitar in different bands, and I can barely read music. So you don't have to master the art of podcasting before you start one, but you do have to start one if you're going to master it. And I would love to help you. Again, go out to schoolofpodcasting.com/start. Use the coupon code LISTENER when you sign up for either a monthly or yearly subscription. And one last thing I want to point out, as it is a new month here in just a few days, this Saturday is October 2nd. And if you have a finished episode and you're looking for a media host, I highly recommend Libsyn. Now, for the record, I've been a happy Libsyn customer for 16 years and also a happy employee for the last 5. But if you use the coupon code SOPFREE, all one word, on October 2nd, or really whenever you're listening to this, the 2nd of any month, you will get the rest of that month. So in this case, that would be October, but you didn't get your full month, which is what that promo code is for. So you'll get all of November. So you get the rest of October and all of November when you go to Libsyn. That's LIBSYN.com. That's short for, by the way, Liberated Syndication, and use the promo code SOPFREE. In the future, I'm going to be doing an episode about how to come back to your podcast if you took a break, because I heard an example and I was like, ooh, that's not how you want to do it. So that might be something we talk about. And I'm always open to suggestions. You can always contact me at schoolofpodcasting.com/contact. Everything is out there, schoolofpodcasting.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. Take care. God bless. And until next week, class is dismissed. You know, having a passion for something. Could you just hear how much she why is my mouth not available? I'm not sure people are tuning in to find out that Sully went to, Ginger Baker Elementary High School or elementary. What does that even mean? Podcasting since 2005. I am your very own Hall of Fame, something, blah, blah, blah. I can never remember this.